color schemes are groups of colors that artists and designers use together in order to create certain harmonious relationships in their work, or contrasting relationships in their work. Color schemes essentially help us to create a sense of style. They can set the mood for a piece, and ultimately they help us to create a unified composition, right? Having a strategy for how you're going to use color. That's where it's important to know the color schemes and know which ones are appropriate for what you're trying to accomplish visually. Make sense? Okay. So the first one we want to take a look at is achromatic. Now, A means without, and chroma means color. So without color, this is essentially a black and white composition. And you may be thinking, well, that's not a color scheme at all. There's no color in it. Well, that deliberate choice to remove color, I guess, makes it a color scheme, right? So why would you want to use an achromatic color scheme? Well, for that very reason. Color has this way of overpowering things at times, and when you remove color from the equation, you're able to concentrate more on things like value or line or shape or texture, all the other elements of design, right? So if you look at black and white photography, it in many ways is more powerful than color photography, at least to some of us anyway. So think about it. When you want to essentially get your viewer to focus on the other elements, especially value, take color out of the equation. Focus on the others. Okay? All right. Again, it has a certain feel to it, right? Okay. Monochromatic color scheme. This is essentially very similar to an achromatic scheme, but it's using a single color, right? Mono meaning one, chroma meaning color, monochrome, one color. Now, it's not just one color. It's a color plus black and white and gray, right? So you can still tint, tone, and shade in this image, but you're reducing it to a single color. Again, this has a way of focusing our attention on other elements of art, but there's a little bit of flavor from that color, right? Again, very unified, very focused. Not a lot of the contrast is going to come from the color itself. It'll come from the values in the image. Right. Here's a great example of Picasso from his blue period, really focused on a single color plus black, white, and gray, sets a certain mood, has a certain level of focus. Right? So again, anytime you're really wanting to focus on the other elements and principles and reduce color, but still have some, think about a monochromatic scheme. And just because it's monochrome doesn't mean that that color can't be intense, right? Think about it. Here's a monochrome piece by Vernon Fisher that's really got us focused. The entire composition is practically achromatic, but one spot of color that really pulls our attention, right? You graphic designers know about spot colors. Well, this is essentially what's going on there. If you target a particular area with a singular color, you can really get your viewer to sit up and pay attention. All right, a dyadic color scheme. Right, so we went from 0 colors to 1 color. Dyadic is 2, right? But it's not any 2. It's going to be 2 colors essentially that are close to one another on the color wheel. Like, for example, yellow and orange, right? It's two colors, two spaces apart on the color wheel. That's a dyadic scheme. So it can't be any two colors. It certainly can't be two colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel. That's a completely different color scheme. But two colors, two spaces apart on the color wheel is a dyadic scheme. Okay, so here's blue and green, right? Again, a little bit of contrast here, but very harmonious, right? Again, here's a Rothko painting, orange and yellow, very harmonious. These colors like each other. They play nicely with each other. Two colors, two spaces apart. Again, this is very similar to monochrome, but we've added a little extra spice into the mix, right? Here's a Fernand Léger painting. Again, oranges and yellows, very close on the color wheel, not a lot of contrast. All the colors are very harmonious, has a certain feel to it, a certain quality. Triadic scheme. Okay, now things get a little more interesting. A triadic scheme, these colors don't sit all that close to each other, right? In fact, if you were to draw an equilateral triangle on the color wheel, right, say from red to yellow to blue, that perfect equilateral triangle, that's a triadic color scheme. So again, they're equally spaced apart. Three colors equally spaced creates a triangle. It's triadic. The primaries are a triadic scheme. The secondaries, purple, orange, green, that's a triadic color scheme as well. Okay, so there you go. Now, why would you want to choose a triadic scheme? Well, every scheme we've talked about up until this point has been incredibly harmonious. Like either you remove color from the equation, you have a single color, or two colors that are very close on the color wheel. These colors are not close, and they're from all over the color wheel. This is about variety. This is about color, right? This is an image that isn't shying away from color, it's celebrating it, okay? Now, like this Mondrian, only the primaries would do for Mondrian after a certain point in his career. And again, it has a certain effect on us, right? Very much about color. There's a Jasper Johns, a primary triad, has a certain feel to it, a certain vibrancy, a certain excitement about it. All right. Here's a Frankenthaler painting, purple, orange, green. Again, triad. It's about variety, right? So think about it. You're going to see a lot of primary triads in the world of art and design. It always seems to work pretty well if the subject that you're dealing with calls for a variety of color. Okay? Again, purple, orange, green, very effective. Tetradic color scheme. Well, we've gone from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3. This is 4. A tetrad, not a quadrad, a tetradic color scheme. 4 colors, but again, not just any 4 colors. It's going to be 4 colors that either form a rectangle or a square on the color wheel. And the result is 2 pairs of opposite colors on the color wheel, right? So if we drew a square, like for instance, it would hit, blue and red, violet, and orange and yellow, green. Well, blue and orange sit across from each other on the color wheel, and red, violet, and yellow, green sit opposite each other on the color wheel. That's 4 colors, 2 pairs of complements, right? So the result here is incredibly vibrant, high contrast, right? Variety and contrast are celebrated in a tetradic color scheme. So, like this example by Kerry James Marshall, incredibly vibrant color. It is a composition that you can't help but notice the color. It's like a triad to but taken to the next level. It's like a complementary scheme, but taken to the next level in a sense. Okay. Right? Vibrant color, lots of contrast. You can't help but notice it. So if you need people to sit up and pay attention, try using a tetrad. Again, like you don't have to use super saturated colors on these things. You can use more toned down versions of these colors if you're not trying to hit your viewer over the head with color. Pardon me. But it certainly is one way to get people to pay attention. Okay, so shifting gears, an analogous color scheme goes the opposite direction. Again, we're returning to colors that sit close to each other on the color wheel that create a great sense of harmony, right? So blue, blue, green, and green, yellow, yellow, green, green, and blue, green, right? 3 or 4 colors that are all right next to each other on the color wheel is an analogous scheme. And, returning to that idea at the beginning, choosing a range of colors that are right next to each other will calm everything down for the most part, right? Or at least color is not going to be the thing that's necessarily going to create the contrast in that work of art. Looking at this Monet, there's a couple of hints of red that he throws in there, but for the most part, this whole thing is blues and greens, incredibly harmonious, and typically very relaxed, right? Not always, but usually. So you'll see analogous color schemes used in landscapes a lot. Anytime the artist is trying to, calm things down, use color in a more harmonious way, analogous is usually a good choice, right? Here's an instance, like this is a Ben Shahn painting that has super saturated, really vibrant color, but it's not color contrast. All the contrast comes from, less saturated background and a more saturated foreground, right? Complementary schemes. This is where you take 2 colors that sit opposite each other on the color wheel, right? Say yellow and violet, right? Opposite, high contrast. Or in this example, red and green. You can't beat putting complementary colors next to each other for creating contrast. The only exception is black and white. Value, when you put black and white right next to each other, that's the highest contrast you can get, but a very close second is green next to red, or blue next to orange, or violet next to yellow. Here's a complementary scheme by Francis Bacon. It's not highly saturated color. He's not hitting us over the head with it, but he's got green tones and pink tones, right? Remember, pink is just the tint of red. So when you put pink next to green, it really vibrates, right? Here's another Francis Bacon painting. Here, the color is more saturated. It announces itself with a little more authority, right? Yellow is the brightest color in terms of value, and purple or violet is the darkest in terms of value. And when you put them next to each other, they not only have value contrast, but color contrast also. Very intense. Here's, again, classic red and green, blue and orange, You're going to see a lot of blue and orange in the world of art and design. Artists really like that combination. You'll see it everywhere, right? High contrast, using color. Now, split complementary is very much like a complementary color scheme, except instead of the exact opposite color on the color wheel, you split to either side of that complement, right? In this case, red-violet, its complement is yellow-green, but instead of yellow-green, you would choose green and yellow, like splitting the complement. It gives you high contrast, but with a little bit more variety. Make sense? And, once again, we're back to choosing this color scheme if you want that contrast, if you want, people to sit up and pay attention to what you're doing. Complementary and split complementary are good choices. Now, the one thing about split complementary you have to watch is that it's very close to triadic, right? It's only a couple spaces off from a triadic color scheme. So oftentimes we can confuse a split complement with a triad. So you've got to pay close attention, right? Split complement. All right, so let's talk about emotion, expression, and the symbolic nature of color. You can, as you know, use certain colors to evoke certain feelings, right? When we look at a piece that has got a lot of red in it, like this one, we might interpret that as, what? Some people see red and they see love. Some people see red and it symbolizes anger, brings out the emotion of anger. Passion, right? Blood. Red has a certain quality about it, right? That we associate. And depending on what culture you're in, it'll change, okay? But let's take a look at Pandora here, right? This Rossetti painting strikes a certain mood. When we see that all that red, it makes us feel a certain way. But what happens if we were to do this? It can change pretty dramatically, right? I basically just took that painting into Photoshop and traded the red for blue, and suddenly it's a different emotional response than we had before, right? Some of you may think, she looks a little more sad. Others of you think she's just as intense, but, you can't quite put your finger on it. But the mood of the piece is different. It's all color, right? Color is the most emotional element that you have at your disposal. So use it well. Here's Picasso again from his blue period, right? He lost his friend and he was devastated, and everything was blue, right? Again, certain emotions that we associate with certain colors. And you know this, but a lot of times you don't stop and think about using that in your own work, using the emotional component that color has to further your message, your ideas. Here's a Sandy Skoglund piece. Incredibly intense, right? That kind of purpley blue interior and this kind of Pepto-Bismol pinky orange in the outside with all these squirrels. It's a bit frenetic, to say the least, and it's that color that really intensifies that feeling, right? If it were different colors, we wouldn't feel the same, right? I really recommend, if you ever get a chance to see Sandy Skoglund's work in person, go for it. It's great. Here's a Matisse. We look at that red spot and what do we think? We think, oh, well, that's a heart, right? We see that blue background with those yellow shapes in front of it, and we think maybe we think stars, right? The color has a certain symbolic component in conjunction with certain shapes that make us, think a certain way. But what happens if that red spot became blue? Instead of it being a heart, all of a sudden, with that blue background, it would be interpreted as a hole where the heart should be, right? What if those yellow splotches became green? They'd cease to be stars and become grass, right? So, again, you don't need me to explain this to you, but you do need to think about this every once in a while as you're planning your work. Make sure that you're using color for its symbolic qualities. Here's a piece that, without color has a certain dignity, a certain quality about it. I just added that pale color of the original back into it, and then suddenly it seems a little more sad. There's this hint of red on the lips and a little flower on the lapel. There is like this little touch of hope that maybe wasn't there in the black and white version. Subtle use of color can sometimes carry with it, again, an important emotional connection. All right, composing with color. Where does your attention go in this composition, this de Kooning painting? It goes right where the yellow is, right? Our attention goes right there. Color has this way of grabbing your attention and holding on to it. All right. Again, where does your attention go? Right to that yellow rectangle. You may not know this, but yellow is typically the thing that your eye picks up on first, right? You might think, oh, it's red. No, it's typically yellow because yellow is the brightest value color. It is, it's that wavelength that definitely catches our eye first. I mean, your eye may travel after that, but a lot of times your eye will hit that brightest, lightest color first. Here's another Sandy Skoglund. All these chartreuse cats, she uses color on those cats, and those cats become arrows directing your attention where? To the woman at the refrigerator, right? Again, use color to direct your viewer's attention through your compositional structure. Okay? Very important. Again, our attention goes to that yellow square inside that dark interior. This piece, cool colors all the way around. Everything is receding, cool purples and blues and greens. And then there's this one shock of yellow on the interior of this barn, and your eye can't help but go there, right? Again, warmer colors are more aggressive, and they will grab your eye first. Cooler colors tend to recede. So color temperature is really important, right? Again, yellows, oranges, reds, warmer, aggressive colors, greens, blues and purples, cooler, more receding colors. Very important that you understand that relationship. Where does your attention go here? Again, just like that Vernon Fisher painting from earlier, that spot of red definitely will attract the eye. There's black and white here that creates a lot of contrast, but that red is that spice, that final resting place for your eye. You can't help but be attracted to it. So again, think about color harmonies. Think about those relationships in your work. Which one do you need to use for your particular artwork, your particular design, to help further the message of the piece, to get your viewer's attention, to keep it, to create harmony and structure in your compositions, and just overall develop a certain style and aesthetic in your work. It's so important that you think about these color relationships and apply them. So good luck to you.